Welcome to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. Pilgrim's Well is a resource for Christians wherever they are in their journey. We're excited to have you join us on this next episode. Hey guys, welcome to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alex Sikma.
My name is Paul van Engelenhoven.
And you are watching the Pilgrim's Well podcast. We are continuing where we left off in Pilgrim's Journey, where last time we looked at the first part of chapter 18, which was Christian and Faithful meet once again on their road to the Celestial City, and they just they have this conversation, this friendly dialogue of where they have been previously. So we've talked about where Christian was at, and then we talked about Christian and Faithful talked about Pliable. And this week we cover Wanton and Moses, and then we talk about shame in this next episode. So I'm looking forward to diving in as we continue. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, Christian. Okay. Take off.
Time to put on my drama face, my performance ready. This is taking me back to high school when I used to do all those plays, but I got to be an actor. Here we go. All right. Well, neighbor faithful, let us cease wondering about him, and rather talk of things that more immediately concern us. Tell me now, what have you met with and experienced, having come thus far? Truly, it would be a wonder worth recording if you had not met with at least some notable encounters.
I escaped the slough of despond which I understand you fell into, and so I reached the wicket gate without any danger, except that there I was propositioned by a woman named Wanton, who intended to do me considerable harm.
It was just as well you escaped her clutches. Joseph in Egypt was severely tested by her, though he escaped her just as you did. Otherwise, she would have cost him his life. But what else did she do to you?
You cannot imagine, except through personal experience, just how flattering her tongue was. She pressed me hard to go with her by promising all sorts of sensual pleasure.
But she did not promise you the enjoyment of a good conscience?
No, for you well understand that what she really offered was strictly carnal and fleshly.
Thank God you have escaped her, since it is the abhorred of the Lord who shall fall into her ditch.
True, but I am still not sure if I have totally escaped her pleading.
Why, I trust you did not agree to her solicitation, did you?
No, I did not defile myself with her, for I remembered an old writing that I had read, which declared, "Her steps descend down to hell." So I shut my eyes to prevent myself from being bewitched with her seductive looks. Then she suddenly became angry and abused me, at which I quickly departed from her.
Did you meet with any other assaults as you went on your way?
When I came to the foot of the hill of difficulty, I met a very old man who asked me who I was and where I was going. I replied that I was a pilgrim going to the Celestial City. Then he commented, "You look like an honest fellow. Will you consider the contentment that is available by living with me, and especially the wages that I am prepared to offer?" Then I asked him his name and where I lived. He said that his name was Adam the First, and that he resided in the town of Deceit. Then I inquired of him what his line of business was, and what exactly the wages were that he offered. To this he responded that his employment offered many delights, and that his wages were full heirship in his family. I further asked him details concerning the support of his household and the servants that he kept. So he explained that his household was maintained with a great variety of exotic dainties gleaned from the four corners of the world. Further, his servants were his own children. Then I asked him how many children he had, and he replied that there were only 3, all daughters. The name, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, and that I could marry them if I so wished. Then I asked how long I could expect to live with him, and he answered, "As long as he himself lived."
Well, and what agreement eventually came between the old man and yourself?
Why, at first, I felt somewhat inclined to go with the man because his manner was quite appealing. However, on looking at his forehead as I talked with him, I saw inscribed there, "Put off the old man with his deeds."
How did you then respond?
Why, it came burning hot into my mind that whatever he said and however he flattered, yet when he lured me into his house, then he would sell me as a slave. So I insisted that he cease his talk, since I had not the slightest intention of even going near the door of his house. Then he reviled me and told me he would set a certain person upon me who would cause the way ahead to become bitter to my soul. So I turned to depart from him. But just as I was leaving to proceed on my journey, I felt him grasp hold of my flesh with such a deadly seizure that I felt he had torn away part of my body for himself. This made me cry out in pain, "Oh, wretched man that I am!" So I went on my way up the hill. Now, when I had proceeded about halfway up the hill of difficulty, I looked behind me and saw someone coming after me, as swift as the wind. So he overtook me just about where the shady resting place is located.
Yes, it was there that I sat down to rest myself, but being quite overcome with sleep, I lost my scroll there because it fell out of my chest pocket.
But, my good brother, do hear me out. Just as soon as the man overtook me, without a word, he struck me down and left me for dead. However, upon reviving a little from my unconsciousness, I asked him why he had treated me so brutally. He indicated that it was on account of my secret inclination to heed old Adam the First. And with that, he struck me another deadly blow on my chest and beat me down to the ground. So once again I lay at his feet now as if dead. Yet having regained my consciousness, I pleaded with him for mercy. But he replied that he did not know how to show mercy. And then he knocked me down once more. Undoubtedly, he would have completely finished me off had it not been for another person who came and demanded that he immediately cease with his assault.
Who was it that ordered him to stop?
At first, I did not recognize him, but then, as he passed by, I noticed the holes in his hand as well as his side. Then I concluded that he was our Lord. So I continued up on the hill.
That man who overtook you was Moses. He does not spare anyone, nor does he know how to show mercy to those who disobey his law.
I well know what you say to be true, because this was not the first time that we had met. When securely living in a city of destruction, it was he who came and threatened to burn down my house if I continued to live in that place.
But did you not see the house that stood on top of that hill, difficulty? It lay on the same side of the way where Moses met you.
Yes, and I saw the lions as well before I came to it. Though it being noon, these beasts seemed asleep. So, because I had so much of the day ahead of me, I passed by the porter of that house and came down the other side of the hill.
All right, so we started off this section talking about this character named Wanton and connecting that with Joseph needing to flee this house. But could you just unpack this a little bit, this character Wanton, and go from there?
Actually, I'm happy that we kind of read all three of these characters together. Because these things really fit together and they reveal a very important lesson, which I think are often missed. So what's going on here, what he's explaining, is you have wanton, which is sensual pleasure, right? So think about with Joseph, obviously sexual pleasure, but also just the pleasure that comes from outside towards us, right? So that's a depiction of the world and the wantonness in the world that tries to lay hold of us. And as John Bunyan describes Faithful wasn't grasped by her, as she wasn't taken away with the lust of the world. But at the same time, he was constantly aware that this was a threat and a danger, right? And whenever he rejected the pleasures of the world, there was an angry response. Like, hey, you don't Why do you do this? Right? You're the opposite. Now, with that, if I may, he connects the old Adam, right, which is the flesh. So now you have the lust of the world, the world and the flesh working together. And Adam had 3 daughters: the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. Right? So you have wanton, the world, then you have the flesh, and then you have Moses coming in kind of like through a back door, right? You're not sure who he is until he's finally defined who he is. And Moses beats down faithful all the time until the point that the Lord comes and liberates him. Now, what is this? Because he's obviously describing the Christian life, and I think in a fantastic way that is often missed, right? So you have, in the Christian life, you have the world trying to allure you out to do its pleasures, right? To fill your heart and mind with the pleasures of the world, with the lusts of the flesh, the lusts of the eyes, and the pride of life, which actually have a desire in your heart. You want to do this. The world is tempting you, and yet Christians will not follow in that completely, right? They will not be grasped and taken hold and follow her to the house of that leads to death. And yet, this what he describes, this Adam, when he comes to the old Adam, it's kind of appealing. Right? And he describes in that our flesh, even though we are Christians, we still have the desire to walk after the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. And then John Bunyan weaves in, just in a brilliant way, the inability of us being able to overcome that by the law. Because in a sense, it helps, right? Moses liberates faithful, in a sense, from the old man, but not really, right? Because when he does that by beating him down and beating him to death, which exactly is, which I think is a wonderful description of Christians trying to escape the power of their flesh by the laws and by rules and regulations, right? It beats the living daylight out of us. Now, it's effective in that, right? I mean, you can make yourself a monk and then you won't be able to see anything. So that makes sure that you won't watch things. And yet it beats you to the point where all your joy in your life is gone. And then the Lord Jesus Christ appears, right? And he liberates faithful here from Moses and from old Adam, right? Because Moses was, in a sense, causing him not to stay in the house of old Adam, or first Adam, rather. But the Lord is the one who finds a different way, who mercifully walks faithful back on the path that leads to life.
There was one of those things that you said in there that makes me think of a scene from Lord of the Rings. I don't know if have you seen Lord of the Rings or read the books?
I have. Not read the book.
You've not really read the books. But there was this one part where, when Frodo is at Mount Doom and he's fighting Gollum at the very end. Gollum falls off with the clutching on the ring, and Gollum and the ring go into the volcano, and they're both destroyed. And Frodo and Sam leave, and then everything starts caving and blowing up and everything. And when Frodo, and I want to say this is after Frodo is recovering, he's back home, he's safe with his friends, and all is well, and the ring is gone forever. He still clutches at his chest because he's reminded of the ring that used to be there, that he was with him his whole life. Or not his whole life, but he was with him that whole journey. Yeah. The ring was gone. It was destroyed. The power was broken. And yet Frodo still clutched at his chest, looking as if he wanted it back, that he was missing the ring. And I just find that closely related to this idea of wanton, or the idea of lust, or the lust of the eyes and the pride of, when all of that sin is broken, when Jesus takes your sin away and puts it on the cross, and we're dead to sin. Now we're moving in this new life in the Christian walk. And yet I still feel like I'm clutching at my chest, missing my sin.
Yeah. Yeah, first of all, you tell it like you were there. You know, it's
Yeah, I was standing in Mount Doom.
Sam and me, and
Me and
Frodo was
Sam.
right ahead of us. No. I think you're onto something, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if Tolkien was thinking about this as he was writing it, because obviously the book series is influenced by a lot of Christian themes.
Yeah.
And that volcano, I want to be careful not making it an allegory perfectly, because obviously
Tolkien would insist that it's not an allegory.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
he's like,
All right, yeah.
I just put Christian themes in it, but it's not an allegory, not in the same sense as Pilgrim's Journey.
Well, you weren't only in the story; you were also with the author. It's amazing.
I've done a lot of research. I was obsessed with it for a while. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so to take the non-allegory, allegorically, the picture there is very much what Paul describes in Romans chapter 6, that we have died with Christ and our old self has died with Christ. And yet then in Romans 7, Paul describes that when he tries to overcome his sin by the law, by his own strength, it is still lingering and it's still there with him, right? When I want to do what is right, I do not, and those passages. So I think you're right, and I think in the Christian life we have that. Even though we've died with Christ and the power of sin is broken and our old man has died that lusted after the world, we still, because of the familiarity in our old body that we're still waiting for the redemption for, right? Go read Romans chapter 8, right? We're still waiting for the redemption of our body with great eagerness. So until the time that we have a redeemed and new body, we will be clutching to that with a perverse kind of fondness, but the Spirit will help us overcome that lust to sin.
Wow.
So excellent, wonderful, great picture.
Shall we continue?
Absolutely.
All right. When I spoke to him, he told me that he had not reset. It's like the Microsoft sign.
You should make a real.
I restarted.
You should make a real bloopers on this at the end of it.
All right. When I spoke to him, he told me that he had seen you pass by, though I wish that you had stayed a while. Those at the house would have showed you so many uncommon treasures that you would have hardly forgotten them in a lifetime. But do tell me, did you not meet with anyone in the Valley of Humiliation?
Yes, I met with a certain discontent who was so intent on persuading me to go back with him, he reasoned that the valley ahead was dishonorable. Further, to go ahead would be to displease all my friends, such as pride, arrogancy, self-conceit, worldly glory, and many others. These, he said, I would be very much offended if I made such a fool of myself as to wade through this valley.
Well then, how did you answer him?
I told him that though all of these that he had named might claim to be my friends, and rightly so in terms of their being relatives in the flesh, yet since becoming a pilgrim, they had in fact disowned me. I also had rejected them, and therefore there were no more to me than if they had never been my family members. Furthermore, I told him that concerning this valley, he had quite misrepresented it, for before honor is humility, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Therefore, I explained that I would rather go through this valley to obtain the honor that the wise so highly value than choose that which he, discontent, esteemed to be worthy of our affections.
Did you meet with anyone else in that valley?
Yes, I met with Shame, but of all the men that I met in my pilgrimage, I believe he bears the most inappropriate name. Although he would not accept it, a variety of evidence would more correctly suggest that he be called shameless.
Why do you say this? What did he say to you?
What, you ask? Why, he objected against Christianity itself. He said that it was a pitiful, low, sneaking business for a man to highly esteem Christianity. He said that a tender conscience was an unmanly thing, and that for a man to watch over his words and ways so as to curtail that swaggering spirit which the heroes of this modern age freely parade would be to make him the most popular object of scorn. He also objected that very few of the mighty, the rich, and the intellectually wise would align with my persuasion. Further, on being invited to become fools, very few would freely venture the loss of all for the sake of a nebulous reward. Moreover, he objected to the base and low standard of living to which most pilgrims submitted themselves. He sneered at their arrogance of the times in which they lived, and thus their lack of understanding of the physical sciences. Yes, and he pressed me with a great deal more besides that which I told you. He said that it was a shame to sit grieving and mourning under a sermon, and that it was shame to return home sighing and groaning. Further, he said that it was a shame to ask my neighbor for forgiveness on account of my petty faults, or to make restitution when I had stolen from somebody. He also said that Christianity caused a man to appear strange before the great of this world. Such a pilgrim became extremely concerned about very petty vices spoken of in ever so serious terms, so this perception caused him to fraternize with the basest of society, solely on the ground of religious convictions. So he concluded. And is this not a shame?
Then what did you say to him?
Say, why, at first I did not know what to say. Yes, he pressed me so hard that my face became red with embarrassment, as if I had myself become ashamed and nearly beaten down in defeat. But at last I began to consider that which is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. And I realized that the shame was describing what men are about, but nothing concerning what God or the Word of God reveals. I thought as well that at the final day of judgment, we will not be awarded death or life by the swaggering spirits of this modern world, but rather according to the wisdom and law of the highest. Therefore, I thought, what God says is best, even though all the men in the world are against it. Seeing then that God prefers his Christianity, seeing that God prefers a tender conscience, seeing that those who yield themselves as fools for the kingdom of heaven are the wisest, and that the poor man who loves Christ is richer than the greatest man in the world who hates him. Then I said, shame, depart from me, because you are an enemy of my salvation. Shall I listen to you? Contrary to my sovereign Lord? Otherwise, how shall I look him in the face that is coming? If I should now be ashamed of his ways and servants, how then can I expect the future blessing? Nevertheless, this shame was a bold villain indeed. I could hardly get rid of his clinging company. Yes, he would even shadow me and continually whisper in my ear countless other weaknesses that he associated with Christianity. Eventually, I told him that it would be in vain for him to continue in this manner, for those things which he derided were in fact those in which I boasted most of all. And so, at last, I was able to leave behind this tenacious child of the world. Then, when I had finally shaken him off, I began to sing, the trials that those men do meet withal, who are obedient to the heavenly call, are manifold and suited to the flesh, and come again afresh, that now or sometimes else we by them may be overtaken, overcome, and cast away. Oh, let the pilgrims then be vigilant and quit themselves like men.
My brother, I am glad that you did so bravely withstand this villain, for I think as you do that of all the people you met, he undoubtedly has the wrong name. How bold he is to follow us in the streets and attempt to put us to shame before a watching world. that is, to embarrass us concerning that which is good. For he was not so audacious. If he was not so audacious, he would never attempt to be so bold. But let us resist him, for notwithstanding all of his bravado, he vigorously promotes himself as a fool. Remember that Solomon said, "The wise shall inherit glory, but shame will be the display of fools."
I think we ought to cry out to God for help against shame, so that we might be valiant for truth upon the earth.
You certainly speak the truth. But did you meet with anybody else in that valley?
No, I did not, for I experienced only sunshine along the remainder of that valley, as well as through the following valley of the shadow of death.
Well, then it was far better for you, since I fared much worse. Almost as soon as I entered the valley of humiliation, I endured a prolonged and dreadful battle with that foul fiend Apollyon. Yes, I thought that he would surely kill me, and especially when he struck me to the ground and attempted to crush me, he seemed intent on breaking me in pieces. For as he threw me down, my sword flew out of my hand. Then he exclaimed that he would now certainly destroy me. Yet I cried out to God, and he heard me and delivered me from all of my troubles. Then I entered the valley of the shadow of death, and from then on I had no light until almost halfway through the terrible place. Over and over again I felt sure that I would be killed there, but at last the morning broke, and with the rising of the sun I continued through that wilderness with far more ease and quiet.
Great section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
So, shame, it's a bit of a complicated story when you read it at first, right? Shame is because it's supposed to be shameless. Who is this character? Well, what I think is the brilliance about this chapter is it reveals to us all these challenges we meet in the Christian life in just an amazing way. So before we talked about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life as the inward enemies. We looked at wanton, the one that comes from outside. Now he talks about shame, and shame in the sense that first of all, discontent, and I think he puts them close together. He kind of introduces shame almost by this character of discontent,
Right.
that's just not happy with anything. That's the one part of the Christian life that's a temptation, that we become discontent in our Christian life, right? That part of the flesh. He's bringing out all these different things of the old man. And then shame, maybe I should challenge you with this. No, I'll spare you. But shame is the attitude of the heart towards other people's opinions once we become a Christian. That's how you have to look at shame here, right? So in other words, when you become a Christian, the world might look at you and say, "Oh, are you one of those weak ones? Are you one of those unscientific ones?" I mean, the scientific guys are all the cool guys. The people who don't need God, they're the strong and the mighty. And in your Christianity, there's all these things you cannot do, and you have to go to the church, or you have to watch what you're saying, or you can't go out and party, and all those kind of things. And it tries to bring in shame upon you. And often, I think, as Christians, we can be tempted by that, right? And by that, begin to lessen our fervor in spiritual life.
So you're just ashamed by your own Christianity, basically. You're
Yeah,
subpar with everybody else of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a competing system, right? I mean, it's a competing worldview, or competing life. If you are a Christian, you're cutting yourself off from all kinds of worldly pleasures. Where the world would be saying getting drunk is fun, right? If you're in a workplace, I remember many times, Monday morning, come to work, "Paul, what did you do yesterday?"
Yeah, what did you do over the weekend?
Yeah, well, I went to church, spent time with some brothers on Saturday afternoon, prayed, had a good time, a fellowship, and they'd just be like, "All right, let's talk about interesting stuff." My weekend, I went partying, I got drunk, I flirted with a girl, or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
It depends what colleague I was talking to.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it was almost like you could feel the tension and how they felt that their weekend was far superior, because that's the weekend everybody would describe as a cool weekend. And it was a battle. right? And when I was a young Christian, it was like, wow, how do I deal with this? Because I do want to be liked and appreciated by my colleagues. I mean, this is my work atmosphere. I don't want to be seen as this weird, strange duck that doesn't fit and doesn't belong. And as I grew in my Christianity, I began to realize, as I grew closer to the Lord, that it has now become more important, because God regenerated me, to be close to God than to be close to the people of the world. And so I just became more bold, and by God's grace, some of these colleagues began to turn and be interested in Christ.
Yeah, I almost started thinking about that, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. It's so tempted for me to be ashamed of that, like, oh, I'm missing out on something. But they're the ones that are missing out.
Absolutely.
If you think about it, on the weekends, I go to church. They don't have church, but the bar is their church. They don't have God, but they still need to commune with people. And that's just kind of how they do it. They're not being fed by the preaching, but that's what alcohol is for, to be fed in their own, but it's that God is leading us, not because I'm not saying this in an arrogant, like prideful sort of way, because I would have never, I'm not saying that I grew up in the partying atmosphere. I wasn't at all, but I still think that it's out of God's grace that he leads us out of those places, or leads us out of worldliness as a general thing, and then helps us to rediscover what, like, just the fullness of life with him.
Absolutely.
And then you realize, whoa, I'm not missing out on anything at all. They're the ones that are missing out. And they're trying to fill their lives with something else that's empty.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the amazing thing is, so I regrettably and unfortunately did grow up and did have my fair experience of the partying life, of what they would call partying life. And when we talked about it, it's a very strange thing if you think about it. So you're going out, you fill yourself with alcohol, and in filling yourself with alcohol, your emotions become kind of numbed or on edge. So you always have people that get angry, that get upset, that get depressed, or people that just... And most of the conversation is not a conversation at all, because it's just about stuff that doesn't matter, because nobody's thinking rightly. Yeah. So you don't have any deep thoughts. You don't have anything that actually satisfies you. And then it's just a parade of lust, of longings and stuff like that, which most of the time is not satisfied. And even if it is satisfied to a degree, it doesn't satisfy you ultimately. And so you go home with this mixed feeling of the alcohol, which destroys your body, first of all. Yeah. But makes you feel miserable in the evening, as it begins to wear off and wean off. And then you wake up the next morning and it feels all the worse. And so I have these colleagues that come on Monday morning that are just look terrible because of their weekend, and they're exhausted, and they basically slept their Sunday away most of the time, right? They woke up 2, 3 in the afternoon. And then are kind of in this weird biological clock that has been all upset and feels uncomfortable. But now they have to talk about it, because they have got to have a story that other people have as well. But once I came to know the Lord, now I'm looking forward to the weekend to meet with my brothers and sisters, to meet with God, and to grow spiritually. So now on Monday, I'm refreshed. Monday is no longer the worst day of the week. It's another day for the glory of God, after I just had a wonderful day with God and his people.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's such a, I mean, that's what is crazy about the Christian life, is that it's all of, it's not of my own doing. If it was all of my own doing, I would have just been lost in the ungodliness, the worldliness, but it's God that renews our mind, and it actually gives us self-awareness, and be like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? And seeing yourself for your sin as it truly is. So now we can turn to him and seek a better life, which is to really pursue God, for God at the end of it, for Christ in the end of himself, not to get something from him, or to but just to seek Christ for the sake of Christ in himself. And then he sort of gives you all these other things on top of that, the satisfaction, fulfillment, and just life in general, like all these gifts that come after that, you know? So
yeah, let me just pause with one more question, just connecting to that. What I think is amazing, if you think about it, when Christianity is described, and this is often where shame arrives, right? Like we're missing out, or we're not living our life the way that we could maximize pleasure or things like that. If you think about that, we don't just meet with some of the things that God has created over the weekend and those corrupted, right? We meet with God himself, right? Where if you compare a worldly lifestyle, they seek corrupted pleasures that God gave to be a blessing. That's really all it is. And so because that corruption goes into the heart, destroys our heart, doesn't make us happy. And so at the end of the day, you feel miserable. Once we come to know Christ, we enjoy the pleasures of God by meeting him fully. That's why we're filled with joy and peace.
Yeah. And then would you say with shame that that shame is something, how would you think of shame actually? I want to go into this route because sometimes I'm led to believe that shame is a bad thing, or that you should hide your shame, or you should suppress it and not think about the shame that your sin brings to you. Is shame something that comes from God to tell us of our sin so that we can turn back to him? Or is shame truly a bad thing that we need to suppress and get rid of in our culture?
Yeah, so now we're talking about two kinds of shame, right? So the shame John Bunyan talks about is the shame that we feel about righteousness, when the shame that is projected on us by a sinful world saying, that's silly, like God is silly.
Yeah.
Right? That's the kind of shame that doesn't
that's
help.
Yeah,
that's a bad shame.
Right.
There is a good shame, and the shame that God, and that has everything to do with honor. So honor is the opposite of shame. Right? There's huge studies on this.
Yeah.
But just to put it in a little nutshell, honor is the sense of worth and value that God created us in the image of God. Shame is when we divert from that path of honor and glory, the way that God has made us to reflect him. So then we feel that we are damaged in some kind of way. And if we are the cause of that, that should bring us back to God in repentance. If that has been caused by us, we also need to go to God and ask for him to heal us.
Yeah,
it's a very short.
It's sort of like yeah. I was just that was a little bit like off the cuff. This is what you get when you have like a free flow dialogue.
No worries.
You get into other things. No, but I think that's good though. So, wow. So that was chapter 18, and we are gonna pick up on the next chapter in the next episode. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Pilgrim's Well podcast. For more, be sure to follow us from wherever you're listening from, whether it be from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. To find us online, go to seventh-ref.org. We'll see you in the next episode.